Let's rank some books by one of my favourite authors, shall we? Chloe from the future popping in here. Slight disclaimer on this video. I filmed this last week. It is currently Friday the 22nd. I'm getting ready to edit this book tomorrow. And yeah, I filmed this last Saturday, I think it was. Since then, the author that I'm speaking about in my list of favourite authors has put up a questionable new project. Something to do with NFTs, which, you know, none of us really understand what they are. They just, yeah, they make no sense to me. I don't really understand what the project was that they were trying to put out. It's all, my only thoughts on it really are, who thought this was a good business idea? But yes, I still wanted to put the video out because otherwise you'd be getting nothing today. But yeah, I don't agree with kind of what has happened this week with that. I think it was a very, like I said, questionable business idea to put out there. But that does not discount from the fact that I do love the rest of his writing. So without further ado, let's crack on with the video. Hi everyone, my name is Chloe. Welcome back to my channel. Thank you for being here today. Today's video is going to be part 3 in the series that I do, which is ranking books by my favourite authors. So I started doing these videos earlier on in the year when I first started my channel to kind of give you guys a little bit more insight into who I am as a reader, who my favourite authors are, and what I particularly love in their books. Now I know I've been making videos for a little bit longer now, so some of you guys might actually know a little bit more about my favourite books because I'll have talked about them in other videos as well, but I still like actually going through each of my favourite authors in turn and kind of ranking their books, just because it lets me sort of gush a little bit more about authors that I love, and it also lets me kind of think about why it is that I love their books and think about sort of favourites that I might want to reread, because whenever I do one of these videos I instantly want to reread their books as well. So yeah, I just really enjoy talking about things that I love, so why not do this? So if you've not seen my previous 2 videos, I will link a playlist somewhere either up above or down below, but the first one I did was a contemporary author and that was Alice Oseman. The second one I did a fantasy author and that was V. Schwab. So for this one I've decided to do an author who does a little bit of contemporary, a little bit of fantasy, sometimes the two of them combined, and that author is Adam Silvera. So Adam Silvera is one of my all-time favourite authors. I know that there are people on here that absolutely love his work. I know there are some people who really do not get on with his writing as well. I am a person who loves his writing so much. I will say that when I get into it, you will see that there is a particular book series that is not as well loved that I enjoy, but is definitely not my favourite. It's going to be the first one I talk about, but I can see the criticisms in that particular piece of work, but in general Adam Silvera's writing just is something that I really connect to. There are some things in particular in my sort of favourite couple of books that just hit me like right there. There's something about his writing that I just can't not love. I can't really explain it, but there is just something about his writing that particularly that connects to me on a more personal level. It's been really lovely to see over the last year actually his sort of rise in popularity through sort of book talk and things like that. I'm not particularly in the book talk world, and it is sometimes a little bit irritating when you see the videos that are in that world where they're like, oh, these books are so underhyped, and it's like, are they underhyped though? Because like I've been talking about these books for years. But it is nice when you see an author that you love really start to get recognition. So it's nice to have seen him be top of the New York Times bestseller list for like a year now, which is great. I have also been able to go to a book signing of Adam's when he did a signing with Becky Albertalli for What If It's Us, and he was just a really lovely person as well. So it's just been nice to see good things happen to him really. And yeah, let me stop rambling about how much I love his writing in general. Let me break down the books that I've read and my sort of like order of preference for them. Let me preface this by saying that while this is a rankings video, my least favourite does not mean that I dislike this book, because these videos are about my favourite authors. So even my least favourite book is generally going to be a book that I enjoy, and for my least favourite book for this one, it has to be, and I know that people are going to agree with this, Infinity Son. I actually have 2 copies. So I actually got the ARC. I got this at Yalk in 2019 it will have been. When I say I got this, actually my friend won this and very kindly gave it to me because it was the only ARC that I wanted that weekend while I was there, and she was very kind enough to give it to me. So I actually read this about a year before it came out, and then I got my finished copy, which is a signed version, I believe. It was a signed one that I ordered from Waterstones. So I've just tried to film a synopsis of this book about 3 times and not done very well at explaining it, which is kind of the reason why it is low down on this list. I'm gonna read you the synopsis on the back. 2 brothers thrown into an epic war, generations in the making. A fight for good and evil between those born with power and those who took it. One brother has the power to end it all, the other will stop at nothing in his pursuit of glory. Who will live forever and who will die trying? So it's about a version of our world where people have power. Some people are born with power and other people take it by basically killing magical creatures, generally phoenixes. And one of the brothers in this story, who is called Emil, he ends up discovering that he has some sort of power, and it's about him kind of discovering why he has this power and how he came to get it, because it links more to those who took it rather than those who are born with it, which doesn't really make sense because he doesn't remember ever taking this power. And then his brother Brighton is kind of obsessed with power, and he is getting a little, throughout the book, he gets more and more sort of obsessed with this world and more likely to do something nefarious in order to gain power himself. And so the issue with this book is that the world building isn't great. That's why I think I just struggled to give a bit of a synopsis, is that it's, as you can see, it's quite a short book for a fantasy. For the first in a fantasy series, it is very, very short, and a lot of stuff is thrown at you. There's a lot of terms and like different groups of people who have different types of powers and how they got them, and it's hard to kind of keep track of it all in your head. What I will say is that I think the actual premise of this book is really good. I think some of the character work in this book I really enjoyed because I could see Adam's writing style in it, but I felt like the actual world building and sort of immersing you in this world itself wasn't the best, and that's what made it a bit hard to keep up with. I have read this book twice now. I reread it before the sequel came out and I preferred it on a second read, but I think that's because I understood the world a little bit more because I had already read it. So yeah, I think it's not as bad as some people will lead you to believe. I think it's just, there are definitely areas that could have been worked on. Adam Silvera has admitted that himself. He said that like the world building was not great in this book, and he knows that. I believe that he kind of possibly wanted originally to go in one direction with it, with the world building, and then had second thoughts and decided to not do that and should have actually gone more towards the world building side, which actually, when I get to the next book on my sort of tier ranking of these books, my next book is the sequel, Infinity Reaper. It's better than Infinity Stone in my opinion, but it's still not as good as his other work that I just prefer in general. And this one, you can see, is a much bigger book. It's got a lot more of the world building in there. I felt like from the very beginning, I felt I was given some of the world building that I was missing from the first one. That being said, because it was already missing from the first one, I was already going into it not as likely to love it as I would do with some of his other work, I would say. So definitely enjoyed this one more, but definitely still not as good as his other books. I'm not going to give you a synopsis of this one because it follows on from a big event that happens at the end of the first one, and there is a big event that happens at the end of this one as well. I believe it's supposed to be a trilogy, so we should be getting a third one at some point, which will wrap this story up, and I'll be happy to get that. I'll be happy to know where the story went, but yeah, I think it's always going to be sort of towards the bottom of my list of Adam Silvera books. So can I just show you one thing in this one though, actually? So there was supposed to be a book tour for this, but it came out at sort of the beginning of COVID. So what we got instead was a signed book plate that you could, if you submitted your pre-order campaign, but the signed book plate is really weird because it has a sort of drawing of Adam Silvera's face on it. But yeah, there we go. So we've talked about the series that I don't love as much. Everything on this list now is books that I do really enjoy, and it's just a case of putting them in order. So let's get on with that. If the camera angle just changed a little bit, it's because I just had a slight instant with coffee everywhere. But we're going to ignore that and carry on with this. So the next book on my ranking list is the only book that is actually written with another author as well, and that is What If It's Us, which is written with Becky Albertalli. So this one I can give a synopsis of. This one follows the story of Arthur and Ben. Ben is written by Adam Silvera. Arthur is written by Becky Albertalli. Ben lives in New York and he has recently broke up with his boyfriend. Arthur has come to New York for the summer for an internship, and they have a meet cute at a post office where Ben is shipping off a box of things that his ex-boyfriend has left at his house, and Arthur is doing something to do with his internship. And basically they had this meet cute. Nothing really comes of it, and then they both kind of think what could have happened between them, and things happen and they end up getting back in touch, and then they have some disastrous first dates, and it's just about sort of their relationship over the summer. It's really cute, it's really fluffy, there's not really too much else to it. I enjoyed reading it. There is going to be a sequel coming out which is called Here's to Us, which I believe comes out in December. If it's not December, it's January next year, but I'm very excited for the sequel. Like I said, I went to a book signing with both these two, so I have a nice little signed dedicated copy, and yeah, I enjoyed this one. It's cute, it's fluffy, it's got some musical references in it. The title is a lyric from Dear Evan Hansen, which I love musicals, so I was always going to enjoy that. And yeah, the thing is with these two authors is that they have very compatible writing styles, but also very different writing styles, whereas Becky Albertalli's books are generally happier and just have a more uplifting quality. A lot of Adam Silvera's tend to deal with harder issues, a lot to do with mental health, and also don't necessarily have the happiest endings. So when you go into a book like this with these two, you do worry which one of them actually got to write the ending. And I will say that Adam Silvera wrote the ending for this book, but it is not as heartbreaking as his other endings have been. Obviously, like I said, we are getting a sequel. I do hope that Becky gets to write the ending for the sequel, because that would lead me to believe that it ends in a nice way. But yeah, I enjoyed this. It's just that I do enjoy the slightly harder hitting contemporaries that he writes on his own, which is basically what you're going to see on the next 3 books in this list, which are his solo work, which are my favourite things that he's written. And yeah, let's just get on to those, shall we? So yeah, basically the reason why Adam Silvera is one of my favourite authors is to do with his work that he writes on his own and his contemporary, if we're going to call it contemporary. One of these is straight up contemporary, 2 of them have got a slightly speculative element to them as well, but basically they all deal with LGBTQ plus stories, and well, actually all of these books are LGBTQ plus, and they all deal with some sort of mental health in these ones as well. They just do tend to be those little bit more like intense contemporaries, which is what I really like. I like them stories to not be just completely happy and fluffy. I like there to be a little bit more to them, and that is definitely what these books are. So I'm trying to decide which one to talk about next, because these next 2 change a lot in which one is my favourite. I think I'm going to have to talk about this one next, but like I said, depending on when you ask me, these next 2 could change a lot. My number 1 is always my number 1, but these 2 do swap over. This next one, actually, for some reason I have 3 copies of it, but that is More Happy Than Not. This one I got because I wanted it to match the paperback copies of the other 2 I still have left to talk about. So I'd already read it by the time I got this one. I think I'd read it like 2 years before, because this one actually, although it was his debut, it was published just before in the Infinity Cycle, I believe, over here. So yeah, this one was just to match on my shelves. I then have my original copy, which is a US paperback, which has the sort of brightly coloured paint splatter version on it, and it has one of those annoying like half covers where it's got an extra bit of cover underneath, which is all of the awards that this book has won. But yeah, this is the one that I originally read, and then I have got the anniversary edition. I believe it is the 5th anniversary edition. It's called the deluxe edition, but this one came out last year, and it actually has a little bit of extra content in here. So it has an introduction by Angie Thomas, but also it has a extra epilogue at the end of it. So this is actually called the More Happy edition. So let me explain the story, and then I'll explain why this edition exists in particular. So this tells the story of a character called Aaron Soto, who is this guy on the front here. This is set in a world where there is a procedure that you can have which will erase memories. It can erase like a single memory, it can erase a whole sort of section of memories, but basically you can choose to have this procedure done to erase memories to make your life a little bit easier to go on with. Some people have it done to erase a bad relationship. Some people have it done because they can't deal with grief after they lose a loved one. And the main character in this has gone through quite a lot, to be honest. His father died, he committed suicide. He himself has struggled a lot with his mental health as a result of this. And then also at the same time, he is struggling with his sexuality because he has a girlfriend, character called Genevieve, but then there is a new guy in town that he ends up developing feelings for. And basically all of this kind of comes together to leave Aaron considering whether or not he should undergo this procedure. And this is, to say it's called More Happy Than Not, this is not a happy book, really. A lot of this story is about the main character really struggling to kind of come to terms with grief, but also with his sexuality as well. I believe Adam Silvera said before that when he wrote this book, it was very much when he was sort of struggling with his sexuality himself, and it's not yet got the most positive outlook on it. And it can be difficult to read at times, and the original ending of this book as well is also difficult to read. I'm not going to go into spoilers with it, but just be prepared that it doesn't necessarily have, it's not one of those books where it's sort of left feeling very uplifted and like everything's going to be okay, because in reality it's not always. But that being said, if you do want a version that has a more uplifting ending, may I suggest that if you're considering reading this book and you haven't bought it yet, maybe pick up this version, because this version has got an epilogue in there which is called the More Happy Ending epilogue. So basically Adam Silvera has said that he always felt like he wasn't quite done with this character and like he didn't quite give him the ending that he deserved, and that he wanted to kind of come back when he was in a better place himself and be able to give this character just a slightly happier ending, something that it's still not sort of tied up in a bow, it's still not everything is miraculously fixed, but it is just a little bit more optimism, and that's what you get in this particular version. And it's about 40 extra pages at the end of the book, and it actually made me like this book a lot more. I enjoyed this book previously, but it was very much number 3 in my list, whereas now it does compete for number 2, because I think with this it just finished it off a little bit more. And yeah, I really enjoyed this book, to be honest, and I would recommend this particular version to anyone that is interested in picking it up. So my number 2 on the list is possibly not what you would expect coming into a ranking of Adam Silvera's books, because this is the one that most people would expect to be at number 1, because it's the one that you don't stop hearing about these days if you were on Book Talk, and that is They Both Die at the End. So this is my number 2. It's not my favourite book that he's ever written. I do very much enjoy it. I love the concept of this book. I know there are potentially plans to be more books in this universe, and I'm very happy about that, because I think there are so many possibilities that exist in this world. But basically this is another book with a slightly speculative element to it. So it's set in a world where there has been some sort of advancement in technology, where there is a company that can predict with alarming accuracy when people are going to die. So basically on the day you're going to die, you get a phone call from somewhere called Deathcast, which tells you today's the day you are going to die. They can't tell you when it's going to happen, they can't tell you how it's going to happen, but they tell you that, yeah, say your goodbyes, this is it. And the two main characters in this are called Mateo and Rufus, and they both end up getting this call, and they end up using this app which is called the Last Friend app. So it's for people who get the phone call and don't necessarily have loved ones that they can sort of spend time with, or maybe don't want to burden their loved ones with sort of spending the last day with them and knowing that they're going to die. So you can connect with other people who are also on their last day, and through this app they end up meeting, and it is basically a love story told in one day, where you know that the ending is not going to be happy. There is a spoiler alert in the title of this book, but there are also obviously a lot of other conversations in there that come up as part of this sort of being their final day, and it is a little bit insta-lovey, because obviously they've only got one day it's going to happen, but also I feel like the situation kind of warrants it a little bit. And yeah, I feel like for a story that takes place in such a short period of time, for characters that don't know each other for very long at all, the connection that is built up between these two characters in here is amazing. Like, I fully bought into their relationship within this, and yeah, I really enjoyed this book. I read it in basically a day. I think it is one of those books that works really well just reading it all in one go, pretty much, because it does take place over one night. It is September 5th that it takes place. It's actually, I did once reread it on the day that it's due to happen, and yeah, I very much enjoyed this book, but it's not quite my favourite just because I loved the other book so much. But I can understand why there is so much hype about this, and like I said before, I am very happy that this is now getting a lot of attention. There is actually a special edition of this one coming out, so I will have 2 copies of this soon because I pre-ordered that, because of course I have, because I am trash for special editions. So the last book on this list, my favourite Adam Silvera book, is actually one that I don't hear people talk about very much. It's probably the one that I've heard people talk about least, because I feel like The Infinity Cycle, I heard people rant about. What If It's Us is a collaboration with Becky Albertalli, so people spoke about that. More Happy Than Not was the first one that I heard people talk about, and Then They Both Die at the End has got all the hype at the minute, and this one kind of quietly just came out in the middle and didn't really get as much love, but it is my favourite. It's one of my favourite books of all time. I've read this book quite a few times now and I still adore it, and that is History Is All You Left Me. So this one tells the story of Griffin, whose best friend, first boyfriend, love of his life was a character called Theo, and he ends up dying in a drowning accident. And this is very interesting in the way that this story is told. So there are 2 timelines. There is before and after. So before starts at the beginning of their relationship, as in their romantic relationship. So they've been friends for years, and the before storyline starts as they get together as a couple. The after storyline is starting at basically just after Theo's funeral, and they go alternate chapter by chapter. So throughout this book you have the sort of happier storyline, which you know is going to lead to tragedy, and then you also have the sort of after the tragedy storyline that you hope is going to lead to some sort of healing eventually. And one of the interesting things in this as well is that you, from the after storyline, you know that actually Theo and Griffin weren't together when he died. He's gone to college and they'd split up, and you don't really know exactly how they got to that point or sort of what state their relationship was in when he dies. All you know that is actually Theo had a new boyfriend, and a lot of the sort of healing storyline for Griffin afterwards is about his connection with Theo's new boyfriend and the slightly unhealthy route that takes. But there's also sort of like things revealed throughout this because of the way that the storylines are told. There's things that you kind of assume from the before storyline, but then you find something out in the after storyline and you're like, oh, okay, now that makes sense. And that's what I really loved. I've said before that I really like multiple timeline books. It's one of my favourite kind of concepts, so that worked really well for me. Just the way that this story unravelled, I really enjoyed. Also, Griffin as a main character, I really enjoyed reading as well. He is a flawed main character, definitely. There are things that he does in here that I do not agree with at all, but there are also just things to do with him and his mental health and sort of just him as a person that I very much related to when I was reading it, and that's one of the reasons why I love this book so much as well, is that it was one of the ones that I felt I could relate to the most. And yeah, this book, no matter how many times I read it, I love it. I find new things with it. Every time I read it, I find new things that sort of reveal themselves to me a little bit more as well, because I know what the twists are. Like, it's always one of those where you have a multiple timeline thing. When you read it a second time, you're like, oh, okay, that was actually hinted there. And yes, I would say to anyone that has sort of discovered Adam Silvera through Book Talk and has loved this one, please read this one. It is very good. And also read this one. If you're going to skip Infinity Cycle, I won't blame you. It's very different, but I feel like if you like this one, then please read these 2, because this is just sort of the like standard of his writing, I would say. This is kind of this is what typical Adam Silvera writing is to me, is these 3 books combined. Right, I spoke a lot longer than I planned to on this video. It's one of those when I start talking about authors that I love, I start gushing. So thank you guys for watching. Please like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff down below. Let me know who some of your favourite authors are. If you really like Adam Silvera's work and you've read all of his books, let me know how your rankings match up with mine. But yeah, thank you, and I will see you guys soon with a new video. Bye!